This right here is the APU Combo PC. I picked up on eBay for just 15 bucks. Inside it is a chip that actually made history, a key part of AMD effort to compete with Intel about 13 years ago. Back then, this APU was a lifesaver for budget builds, the go-to solution for anyone who wanted to play games but didn't have the money for a dedicated GPU. So today, we're going to crack it open and see exactly what kind of combo deal you can get for $15 in 2025. Right out of the box, the first thing we see is a Gigabyte F2 A55M motherboard. And yeah, it definitely shows its age. The colors are faded, the PCB looks a little tired, and even the cooler bracket has some light rust on it. Totally understandable for something that's been alive for 13 years. RAM? We get a single 4GB stick of DDR3, which is, let's just say, minimalistic. But the star of the show here is the A8 5600K. The IHS isn't exactly spotless, but there are no scratches or dents, and more importantly, the pins on the underside are perfectly straight. That's what really matters. This APU is a great example of why AMD absolutely dominated Intel in integrated graphics back when it launched. Their iGPU performance was on a completely different level for budget gaming. But before I praise this combo any further, I'm gonna clean it up a bit, make it look less like it survived a decade in a basement, and then plug it in to see if it actually boots. On the very first boot, thankfully the combo powered on and went straight into the BIOS without any issues. But when I moved the RAM stick over to the second slot, the system refused to display anything. So my first guess was, okay, maybe this RAM slot is dead. I cleaned it, brushed off the dust a bit, but nope, same result. At that point, I accepted the idea that I'd have to run this system with just one stick of RAM, even though the board has 2 slots. But here's the funny part. Later on, I tried installing both sticks at the same time, and the system booted perfectly. Turns out the slot wasn't faulty at all. After doing some digging, I learned that on this motherboard, the slot on the right isn't the primary slot, so if you only install one stick there, the system simply won't boot because the priority slot is empty. I'm not totally sure if that's accurate, so if you know more about this RAM priority thing, let me know in the comments. Let's rewind the clock 13 years to a time when this little APU was basically the budget gamer's hero. Back in October 2012, the PC market was in a heated battle. Intel completely dominated raw CPU performance, while AMD was struggling to keep up, at least on the CPU side. So AMD took a different approach and dropped something totally new for the mainstream, the A-series APU based on the Trinity piledriver architecture. Their idea was simple but brilliant. Combine a CPU and a legitimately strong GPU into one chip, giving gamers a way to play without needing an expensive graphics card. And that's where the AMD A8 5600K came in. This thing was the go-to option for anyone trying to build a cheap gaming PC in 2012. Its integrated GPU, the Radeon HD 7560D, absolutely crushed Intel's HD graphic 2500 and even 4000 at the time. If you were playing League, Dota 2, CSGO, or Skyrim back then, this chip was basically a cheat code for budget gaming. At launch, the A8 5600K cost around $101, making it a very tempting alternative to Intel's Core i3 lineup, like the i3-3220. But of course, nothing is perfect. The piledriver architecture still struggled with single-core performance, and the chip definitely drank more power than its Intel rivals. Specs-wise, you get 4 cores, 4 threads, a base clock of 3.6 GHz, and a boost up to 3.9 GHz. But the real fun is the K at the end. This chip has an unlocked multiplier, meaning anyone could overclock it with just a few BIOS tweaks. In this video, I'm going to test the raw performance of this old APU first, and then we're going to overclock it to see how far it can still go in 2025. Can this 13-year-old chip survive modern gaming? Well, we're about to find out. As always, I'll be using my SSD that already has Windows and a few games installed, so we can jump straight into testing without wasting any time. Inside CPU-Z, the APU is correctly detected as the A8 5600K. In raw performance, it scores 632 points in multi-core and 205 points in single-core. Numbers that look tiny today, but more than 10 years ago. This was the kind of performance people actually dreamed of when building a budget PC. Switching over to YouTube playback, yeah, it's not great. Visually, it looks like around 20 FPS, and both the CPU and RAM are completely maxed out. CPU at 100%, RAM pushing over 90%. Realistically, this thing is only comfortable playing videos at 720p or lower. Moving on to Minecraft at 1080p 8 chunks, the experience is honestly pretty rough. FPS hovers around 30, but constant frame drops make it almost unplayable. With only 4 GB of RAM, the iGPU clearly doesn't have enough memory to borrow for graphics, so the system is choking hard. So I'm going to slot in 2 8 GB sticks, bringing the total to 16 GB, and we'll see how much that changes the performance. Now let's jump back into Minecraft. And honestly, I did not expect this. The performance actually got worse after the upgrade. FPS dropped to single digits, completely unplayable, and the CPU was pegged at 100% the entire time. Clearly 1080p is way too much for a 13-year-old processor, so I lowered the resolution to 720p, and yes, FPS did improve, averaging a bit over 20 FPS, but the stuttering was still horrible. It just wasn't a comfortable experience at all. Next, I dropped the render distance to the minimum, and finally things started to look normal. FPS jumped to around 80 to 100, smooth enough to actually play at a basic level. I then tried installing a GTX 750 Ti, 2 GB, and the difference was night and day. The average FPS shot up to around 150, with real-time spikes hitting 250, even 300 FPS at some moments. There's still a little bit of micro stutter here and there, but honestly, for a CPU this old, it's handling Minecraft at low settings surprisingly well. Next up is Doom. I set the resolution and graphics to the absolute lowest settings possible, and yeah, it was rough. When I was just walking around, the FPS hovered around 13, but the moment anything visually intense happened, it tanked straight into single digits. Completely unplayable. I couldn't enjoy it at all, but once I slapped in the dedicated GPU, everything flipped. The game instantly became smooth and actually fun to play. FPS stayed around 50 to 60 and the overall experience was way better. Barely any frame drops, just a nice consistent gameplay loop. Switching over to Left 4 Dead at 1080p, the FPS honestly wasn't great. I was barely hitting around 20 FPS while fighting off hordes of zombies. One thing I can compliment though is the iGPU. It was running at 100% the entire time, trying its absolute best. Because of that, the CPU was only sitting at around 50%, but the overall experience? Yeah, not exactly enjoyable, but once I upgraded to a dedicated GPU, everything changed. The FPS instantly jumped to around 50 and sometimes even pushed past 90 FPS. The difference was massive, way smoother, way more playable, and honestly a night and day improvement compared to relying on the iGPU. After overclocking and running a few tests, the results honestly weren't very impressive. The CPU started overheating almost immediately, so the performance barely improved compared to stock. The boost clock only held around 3.9 GHz, which is basically the same as before. Nothing worth celebrating. It's clear the cooler we're using just isn't enough to handle proper overclocking on this chip. In Cinebench, the CPU scored 679 in multi-core and 215 in single-core. To be honest, the gains are so small that overclocking this APU just isn't worth the effort. I went back and tested Minecraft again, and even though the FPS still isn't crazy high, you can clearly see the improvement. The average FPS jumped by about 30 frames compared to before overclocking. Not bad at all for a 13-year-old APU. Unfortunately, I couldn't get any software to properly show the CPU clock speeds, so I can't confirm exactly how much it was boosting. But hey, that just means we've got a perfect excuse for another video. Maybe a full cooling or overclocking experiment next time. So after all the testing, it's pretty clear this $15 APU combo is more of a nostalgia machine than a real gaming setup in 2025. It can still run some games, especially with a dedicated GPU, but the experience ranges from barely playable to surprisingly okay, depending on how nice you are with the settings. As a budget experiment, it's fun. As a daily gaming PC? Yeah, not anymore, but for 15 bucks, totally worth the ride. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this little time travel build, drop a comment, hit like, and I'll see you in the next one.